Hey everyone, welcome to the TechPulse Professional Services Podcast. I'm Tyler Miller. I'm the president and CEO at TechPulse. I'll be your host today. Joining me, I have Christopher Scaminaci, VP of Engineering at TechPulse, and the man himself behind MSPAutomator.com, a platform revolutionizing the way MSPs think about automation. And today, we're very lucky to have our first special guest, Mikey O'Toole, the creative force and developer behind the HaloAPI PowerShell module and the renowned authority in HaloPSA and automation. Welcome, Mikey.
Pleasure to be here. It's going to be awesome.
All right, Chris, you want to kick us off? Kind of give a quick rundown of the podcast?
Yeah, so today we're kind of looking to expand on what we did with our webinar the other day on the HaloPSA, best practices, automation, what does an implementation of HaloPSA look like? Is HaloPSA right for my MSP or not? So I think what we're going to cover today is, besides, getting some valuable insight from Mikey, who, pretty much wrote the book on how the Halo API works. We want to talk about, what the different perspectives look like for MSPs and why, maybe HaloPSA is the right pick for them. And maybe we're going to venture off that track and maybe not talk about HaloPSA so much, but I think it's everything we've all got in common here. So it's going to be, heavily focused in that direction. But we really want to get to things about, like, what are the state of MSPs and where does the role of HaloPSA come into that, right? Like, has it changed the industry as a whole? Why is that? And, we're going to talk about some cool, nerd shit too. So.
Sounds good. And that's our first episode, so we're super excited. Kick it off. So let's just talk about kind of the state of MSPs currently and the role HaloPSA plays into that, right? How do you guys think Halo stands apart from other platforms? I'll kind of give my 2 cents on it. Obviously, there's a ton of PSAs out there, right? Some great, some not so great. Some legacy platforms. I think there's 2 main points that stick out in my mind as a business owner where Halo sets himself apart, right? That first point being modern infrastructure and their modern software design, right? The interface of other PSAs, I'm not going to name anything specifically. They're clunky, right?
Connectorize Autotask.
They're clunky, and they've attempted to improve them over the years, right? But they just still aren't the best. So, aka the infamous 10,000 autotask pop-ups, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think the design and customization and control Halo gives us as MSPs allows us to work at a much faster pace and improve not only our agent efficiency, but back office operations as well. I think the second point there is the flexibility with automation, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And Chris and Mike, you're experts in that. Just to be able to connect external APIs, create custom automation workflows, it's invaluable to an MSP, I think, to not be put in a box, right? If you aren't leveraging automation as an MSP, right, you need to be. It saves a ton of man hours and reduces human error a lot, which creates a much better experience for your internal team at your MSP and your customers, I think. So while Halo may not be the perfect match for all MSPs, right, you got to kind of go out there and see what fits best for your needs. I do think it's leaps and bounds around the other products out there in the marketplace. And they also keep iterating on features a lot, right? They're pushing out their roadmap. I mean, it's crazy how fast they're pushing out new versions and new features, which I think a lot of the larger legacy PSAs, really slow down on after a while. So
what's really interesting to me is that Halo has the modern infrastructure and a really kind of snappy development cadence, but then not a new kid on the block. The predecessor to Halo was NetHelpDesk. It's been around since the late 90s, early 2000s. Fundamentally, Halo is still built around that same core, that same NetHelpDesk application. So really, NetHelpDesk were quite forward thinking in how they built to start with. But when they decided to go the Halo direction, they completely scrapped their entire GUI layer and rewrote what we know today as Halo. It's kind of proof to the other players in the industry that actually, if they cared, if they wanted to do this and modernize their platforms, they all could. So the fact that they haven't means they don't want to. They don't care enough to do it. So yeah, Halo, they've got it, but they had to work to get it. They didn't design in this way in the first place, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I 100% agree with that, right? NetHelpDesk was not a super popular or even really well-recognized name on this side of the pond.
It wasn't on this side either.
Right, yeah. And, and HaloPSA is exactly what it is, right? It's a scrap of the GUI layer, and we still see a lot of stuff called NetHelpDesk in the back end, right?
Yeah,
NHD,
server
NHD core.
and NH agent, and yeah, it's all in there.
And really the brilliance and the flexibility of HaloPSA and NetHelpDesk is the fact that they're just a web API, right? And all they had to do was recreate the front end layer. Yeah, there's a lot of back end changes that have happened since then, obviously, but Halo, they did it. They took the time to actually, recreate their front end and, make the changes necessary that MSPs needed to move into the future versus maybe ConnectWise and Autotask where the interface is straight up the same interface you've been looking at for the last 20 years, right?
At great risk as well, it can't have been an easy decision for NetHelpDesk Limited as they were then to split into Halo Service Solutions and to build, up to 4 streams now? HaloPSA, ITSM, Service Desk, and CRM. To split into that business model must have been a huge risk, especially with no external funding. Halo is self-funded. There's no venture capital firm behind them saying, oh yeah, have another 10 million.
Yeah, exactly. And they did that during COVID too, right? Like the divergence of the brands happened mostly. I think ITSM might have been the first one, right? Or was PSA the first one? Yeah, ITSM was the first one. Yeah, and then they're like, oh wait, MSPs like this product. Let's make a PSA. And the divergence of the product streams that happened right at the height of COVID. And anybody that was using Halo or going through Halo during COVID can understand it was tough for them, right? The staffing was a problem, getting enough people trained up, getting implementations done for people, and at the same time they were still iterating on that product very hard. The Halo PSA that we know today is so wildly different even than the Halo PSA we were working with 2 years ago, and props to them for that. They have what it takes. They went through. They have the growing pains, but we've seen some massive improvements.
Yeah, we have. Not that all is perfect. They've still got a way to go in terms of documenting things and kind of that user-friendly piece. But honestly, that feels very different from the challenges with a lot of other products in that I'd rather the challenge be finding how to do something than it just not being possible. With Halo, almost anything is possible. And that's that API layer, because the Halo front end we all use is just an API. Everything it can do, you can automate. Everything it can do, you can automate without exception. No other PSA offers us that. Not one.
Not even close. And it's not even in the same ballpark, right? Apples and oranges. And Halo, I think, went into the design of their product with that in mind, right? Because you can see the way that the API is constructed and the way that they are not building boxes around us, right? It really speaks that there was some kind of design methodology there that said, we know that we don't know things, so we're not going to box you into our ways of doing things. We're going to make you, a truly extensible, flexible product. And if we get it wrong, go do it yourself. And you can, right? There's, like Mikey said, there's nothing you really can't do. Even if there's functionality that may not exist in the front end, well, you can usually amalgamate whatever few API calls you need to create that functionality yourself externally. And usually, if your idea is good enough, Halo will steal it from you and put it, put it in production. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a well-designed product from the ground up.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think let's talk about the elephant in the room too, right? Which is important to me. Is a lot of people are talking about Kaseya and they buy these companies up, stop development, things like that. And right, recently Halo made a promise, right, Chris?
Oh, the Halo way.
The rolling 10-year promise, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. Documented on every single website they've got, halopsa.com/the Halo way. And it's right there, that statement of a rolling 10-year commitment that they will not acquire or be acquired. This industry where everything's folding into everything else and the best tools on the market can get bought up and completely cannibalized within a year. There's a growing tendency in this industry to evaluate platforms based on roadmaps or promises. And all of us have been let down by vendor promises before. Halo, as it stands now, is a great platform with some documentation issues and still experiencing a few growing pains, but it's a great platform that, as it stands now, can do almost anything you need of a PSA. I don't know another product that I can sit there and say that does everything I want and gives me the functionality to build the stuff it doesn't have. And that for me is why Halo is my choice every time.
So Mikey, you're the infamous creator of the Halo API module, right?
Yeah, well, not alone.
Sure.
Luke Whitelock, a pretty outstanding automator and kind of MSP community contributor in his own right. Guy behind MSPP.io. Always have to remember where that second P comes. He helped get it off the ground. He was migrating to Halo at roughly the same time we did. I think he was about 3 months behind us. And we were both starting to hit the API, and then we kind of came together, and the module was born out of that collaboration. It was something I'd started the framework for, and then with Luke's help, it grew very quickly in terms of the number of endpoints we covered. And yeah, Halo themselves were really supportive. We had, virtually direct access to their API devs to unpick how various calls functioned, and we hit so many limitations of the API initially, which again, with Halo's pacing, we'd hit an implementation bug where an endpoint didn't work properly. We'd report it to Halo and they'd have it fixed the next day. It was that kind of like we were hitting a bug and then they were fixing a bug and then we moved on and we hit another one. It was a really cool process. Like I thoroughly enjoyed the process of building it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's another point too I want to add. Like, right, I've noticed the Halo PSA community is very tight knit and they just want to help the community. And so that's pretty inspiring. So in your mind, right, the API module, how does it empower MSPs? How does it make them better?
So weirdly, I think the area where it seems to get the most use is migrations. I've had MSPs come to me from, that I've never spoken to before, never interacted before, who've just popped up and randomly said like, hey, thanks for the module. It allowed us to migrate from, and then, insert some unknown random service desk tool here. There was a guy who was like, yeah, my PSA only exported XML files. So I wrote something to parse the XML files and use the API module to get it into Halo. So it seems to really feature well in people's migrations. I don't get as many stories about people automating with it, but maybe that's just because they don't want me to steal their secret source. Because if you share something with me that you're doing in the module, there's a good chance I'm going to steal it from you. So
Right. Okay, so in developing the module, what nuances did you take into account, right, to ensure robust MSP support? And like, what are you most proud of?
So what nuances did I take into account to allow robust MSP support? The honest answer, and do you the credit being completely frank here, none. It really was built around the needs of me and Luke at the time. That's why it's still PowerShell 7 only, because we were both pretty familiar with PowerShell 7 at that point, and we didn't want to write backwards compatible code. We wrote it so it could run in as your function apps. So yeah, it really was written for our needs. The fact that anyone else is able to use it reliably is really a testament to the MSPs using it more than us and our design choices, because we didn't choose to design it for everybody.
Sure.
Mostly open sourced it so other people do some work on it for me, which has worked well.
Nice. I like that.
What I'm most proud of, the community that's built around it, like the number of people contributing stuff and the number of folks it's helped get into Halo, but also automate stuff with Halo. That's what I'm most proud about, really, is how it's helped people and MSPs get into Halo and use Halo.
That's awesome.
He's not giving himself enough credit there, because the Halo API module, somebody who lives in PowerShell and is also a PowerShell guru, is a technical masterpiece. The pre-flight checks, the way that things are broken out into objects, because there's no match better made in heaven than a web API and a PowerShell REST method. Like it's just they just go together so perfectly, and he doesn't give himself enough credit, because the Halo API PowerShell module, I think, is probably the single most important community tool that exists for the Halo PSA platform, but also it's done a huge service to the community to bring us automators together, right? I mean, there's probably 10, 12 of us in the world that deal with Halo PSA at this level, right? And we've all been able to connect over Mikey's module. And we're building bridges across continents here between all of the different integrators and onboarding partners. And
There was a cool thing I had to figure out whilst building it, which was if you pull up Halo's API spec, assuming it doesn't crash your browser, and if it does, this isn't a carefully crafted denial of service attack that we're planned for you. That's just how large it is. It's like 15,000 lines of JSON. It's horrific. But yeah, if you pull up that spec, you'll see how many parameters some of the endpoints have, like how many individual possible combinations of parameters there are. And I built a dynamic parameter parsing system. So instead of having to hard code like an if else statement for every parameter, the module just looks at the ones that are set and then converts them to what the API expects formatting wise. That was probably my proudest thing. And I've taken that and reused it for the Printix API, Ninja One API, and a couple of others. So yeah, that was a nice thing to figure out.
That's, again, technical masterpiece, right? Because you're not kidding. Like the ticket, I think the ticket endpoint for get and post ticket, there's like 2,400 parameters possible on that, right? Because it's also passing things like the entire client record, the contract record, everything that's attached to that. It's impossible. And like we ran into this when we were building the SDK for C#. We have an internal SDK that we've developed over the last couple of years that powers a lot of our Blazor tooling, and having to class all of those parameters into C# classes is the worst thing ever. There's not a JSON converter in the world that you can like pop that large of a parameter pool into and get a fully formed class out of. So it's been a lot of trudging and manual work, but at the same time, Halo's design here is actually quite clever because it makes the API so extensible. And the Swagger file though, right? It's been crashing browsers for at least 3 years.
I got it to render the other day. I was quite impressed with myself. First time ever.
They must have fixed it then because I've never had a render. Yeah.
I think it might just be running in its own Azure data center. There is just a dedicated AWS data center for that Swagger file.
Yeah, like they just have an entire a scale out cluster just that serves that Swagger file. Absolutely, I could see it.
All right, cool. So let's pivot to like HaloPSA features, right? I'm interested in your guys' input on like how the feature set has evolved, and how has that impacted, helping and supporting like MSPs' growing needs in the marketplace. What do you guys think?
Let Mikey go first. Yeah.
Their pace with integrations is kind of cool. They were pretty quick on a SIP integration. Both a very basic one that came first, which was really just custom buttons, but they had some examples and documented ways of using custom buttons with SIP, right up to now they're the first PSA integrated with SIP, and that's kind of a nice marriage. They were very quick to support and sponsor SIP, and now they've got a really tight integration. Which for us has been phenomenal because we'd written our own. So I'm now unpicking our custom integration to use the native one, which is not something I've done very often, which is kind of interesting to watch and may result in some improvements to SIP. We'll see. But yeah,
thank you, Kelvin, for being the inspiration for all of our thievery over the years.
Yeah, so much stolen from Kelvin. Probably
so much stolen from Kelvin. Yeah.
But the pace with which they keep up with the industry as well is nice. Their M365 CSP stuff is GDAP compatible. A little bit of a rocky road for them to get there, but they still manage that quicker than basically anyone else I know. I'm not aware of anyone else who got there that quickly with multi-tenant CSP stuff, which is really neat to see. Their integrations, they're really atypical for the MSP world. Just the number of integrations they've got into external MSP tools, but also not pure MSP tools, which I kind of like. I like the fact that they've got the CRM style social media integrations, and they thought of doing the Teams bot natively instead of saying, oh, just, go and bolt on this external service that costs as much as your Halo license again. I like that philosophy where they will try and build stuff to solve a challenge. And because they've got that quad stream, we get as many PSA MSP features as we get ITSM or CS or Service Desk or CRM solutions, because the way Halo work is they have this bank of development hours, and each of those 4 streams gets a certain allocation of development hours. So we know going forward that Halo is going to keep evolving as an ITSM tool, a service desk, a PSA, and a CRM at roughly the same pace. So we get all these cool features that no other PSA is even considering, because really most PSAs are really kind of weak CRMs. They usually start from an ITSM background and then completely lose it halfway down the line. But yeah, I'd say most PSAs do get some kind of PSA and service desk working. That's probably the baseline. But yeah, the CRM and kind of service desk ITSM stuff is cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think there's probably no other product on the market that can hold a torch to Halo as an ITSM product. Just the extensibility and the care that was taken to design the way that ticketing and ITSM works inside of Halo PSA is really second to none. You would be hard pressed to find even a ticketing product off the shelf that does ticketing as good as Halo PSA, right? I would say if you need simple, you need Zendesk, but if you need anything beyond simple, Halo PSA is probably going to be the play, right? That help desk style of ticket processing and working with tickets is phenomenal. It's different, and different doesn't mean wrong. They're kind of redefining a genre of PSA.
Okay, so staying on the topic of integrations, right? Because that was one of the things Mikey initially mentioned. With the rise of Microsoft 365, Azure, how has Halo adapted its integration capabilities to keep up with that? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think Halo started from a good place in terms of integrations, in terms of breadth, at least as long as I've been using them. They had a decent range, and they had integrations that aren't super common elsewhere in the MSP industry. We're a bit weird in the MSP industry. To every single person listening to this podcast who's ever talked to me before, going, "Well, duh, you're weird." But yeah, we came from Dynamics to Halo. Our PSA before Halo was Microsoft Dynamics, and Halo has a cool integration. So Dynamics is still our source of truth for CRM style data. But Halo offered us an integration. It wasn't really a key ask, but it's there and it works really well. And that's what I found generally with their integrations is, on the whole, they're really solid for kind of your basic out of the box needs. But when you hit that limitation where the integration isn't great, we've all done it. We've all used the platform and it has an integration, and we turn the integration on and you start using it, and then you're like, oh, I wish it did this. Well, with Halo, that's just an API call. That's just, that really is easy to fill in the gaps with the integrations. We run the Ninja One integration. We also supplement it with our own Azure function that pulls a bit more information out of Ninja into Halo. So Halo's integrations are solid and they have a really good range, but also because of the openness of their API, it's really easy to plug the gaps and to build those newer integrations where Halo aren't quite there yet, which is awesome. Yeah, that flexibility is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sometimes they iterate on these integrations so quickly that you kind of wonder, looking at them, who this integration is for. And I have to think that sometimes they are for people, but I like to, is give the example that there's several integrations in Halo that probably they didn't really have the context of what they were doing when they built it. I always like to dig on the data commerce integration, because it's worse than useless. It's actually wrong, and it drives me nuts. And it drove me so nuts to the point that I had to build my own order management and reconciliation platform to kind of hook into data commerce. And I wouldn't have been able to do that on ConnectWise or on AutoTask. I was only able to do that because of how flexible Halo was. And the integration capabilities. When we talk about integration with Halo, it's night and day difference to what we're talking about integration with other CRMs, or even like PSAs or any other ticketing platform, where those integrations are a lot of times closed off, or they're third-party paid integrations. You don't really, you're not going to spend the time and invest the time building your own, Zoho integration for whatever you're doing at your MSP, right? Like nobody's got the time to do stuff like that. And if you do, then you're going to probably sell it. But just the fact that that's possible is the fact that we can, we have so many integrations for HaloPSA. There's so many more coming all the time. And if we don't like them, we can just do it ourselves, which I think is probably, as somebody who is very anal retentive about the way that I do a lot of things, I really appreciate the flexibility of that, right? I don't stop boxing me into the way that this MSP does something, right? And Halo is usually very good about giving you the freedom of flexibility because there's no, depending on where you are in the world, depending on what kind of MSP you are, you're going to do things very differently. And I guess this is a good thing to kind of segue into the fact that this makes Halo's barrier to entry maybe a little higher than something like ConnectWise or Autotest that out of the box aren't going to work either, but they may be more, they make better sense out of the box as an entirely integrated platform. Whereas Halo, it's kind of like you get to a demo Halo instance and you're like, okay, great. I see that I have all of these buttons and I see that there's some stock workflows. I don't know how any of this stuff goes together. There's maybe no documentation, or maybe the documentation is 2 or 3 years old and the windows don't even look like that anymore. Like, where do I even begin? So it's more like Halo is a raw set of tools, right, that you can, use to really customize your experience. And that doesn't mean it's difficult, I guess is my point, right? Because you can take those same tools and you can build guardrails around your processes, around your workflows, around your data, so that it prevents agents from going off of the rails, right? And manually changing a status. They might put something into a black hole, or you
But you hit the nail there.
simultaneously.
Most importantly, you're building the guardrails around your process, not the process that they have decided to design the product to accommodate. Your process every time in Halo. And that's what I like seeing when people kind of share how they've got things set up, is the breadth of scenarios it'll support in different processes is awesome. It really is unique to each MSP that's using it.
Yep, and I would say that before I started, before TechPulse had an onboarding partnership with Halo in January, I was very much a Kool-Aid drinker of these are the best practices for the industry as dictated by, C-level ops or whoever our overlords are, whoever we like this year in the MSP community, right? And by month 2 or 3, there was starting to be cracks in my foundation on this. And, now here I am 11 months later, and I think best practices is just a buzzword at this point, because who's really to decide what our best practices are? The best practices, for a certain type of MSP in a certain geographical region are going to be completely different than what they are somewhere else for a different kind of MSP. And you can't just hold everybody to this gold standard. I've seen so many.
I've definitely watched you go on that journey as well. Like initially, you were pretty skeptical of Halo's approach to things and the system, and you've definitely gone on a journey with them, which is awesome. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, maybe they gave me some kind of mind control virus, or maybe it's a cult and I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid now. I don't know, but
it could be. But at least the ropes are cool.
Yeah, that's true. The robes are pretty cool. Tim gave me those. Now that I think about it, so the processes I've seen, a lot. I guess a lot of what we do is MSPs will come to us and they'll be like, "Hey, we implemented ourselves, or we did an implementation with Halo, and they got us 90% of the way there, but we need some customizations." And you'll come in and you'll see the very unique, interesting processes that these folks have come up with and implemented in HaloPSA, and you're like, "Man, that is actually pretty smart. And if I had seen this 2 years ago, I would have stolen this." But I wouldn't have probably even considered it 2 years ago because it wouldn't have been a best practice, right? And I think the fact that the flexibility of the platform without losing efficiency, there's nothing wrong with using your own unique processes and workflows if they get the job done for you and they're efficient and they're not error prone. And Halo kind of removes that leash from a lot of us in a lot of ways. We're not restricted to what ConnectWise and SLI says is the best way to do something anymore. We can do anything we want. And if we can bring the receipts and show that it works, it's efficient, it's not error prone, then why not? why not rewrite the rules? It's been 20 years, 30 years since these rules were written. You know, it's time to look at things in a more modern way.
Will do. All right, so I kind of want to pivot into actual automation. Chris, I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've written a few times about this on MSP Automator blog, right? How have you leveraged, two-part question really, is what I kind of want to pick your brain about, is how have you leveraged PowerShell and other tooling to enhance Halo's automation potential and capabilities? And what is your favorite, most powerful automation you've written so far?
Sure. So how do I leverage PowerShell and other kinds of automations? And, you know, I would say that PowerShell is obviously the core tenet of everything that we're doing automation-wise, because like you don't need to necessarily make things more complicated than they need to be. I things that I have taken to the next level out of PowerShell and into like C#, Blazor, SaaS-based tooling, that's stuff that needs to run very quickly or has a heavy data footprint, things that might be slow in PowerShell. But I still always prototype all my tools in PowerShell. Right. So many of the custom integrations in the middleware that we've built for Halo is still running PowerShell runbooks or PowerShell Azure Function apps. The I guess especially when you're working with 2,000 parameters on an API endpoint with Halo, it serves you some justice to use a classless and typeless language like PowerShell. Everything just being an object really saves you the nightmare of those strict type definitions. But I would say that PowerShell being the core tenet of probably all automation we see in the IT industry, or most of the automation we see in the IT industry, especially in the MSP industry, lowers the barrier of entry, makes things quicker to prototype, bring to production, and just the fact that you can interact with the Halo API in PowerShell makes things just that much easier. They're a match made in heaven. PowerShell objects through Mikeys module to the Halo API and backwards again. Not having to worry about JSON linting and converting, things to and from JSON objects. No, you just work with everything in an object and you pass that object to the PowerShell module and it goes off to the API and does the thing. So, that answers the first question. What was the second question that you asked me? Because I just started rambling and lost it.
The most, I guess you're the most powerful or your favorite automation? At least right now.
Oh yeah, I have a lot. So my favorite automation is what has now become BillingBot and OrderBot. OrderBot and BillingBot are my babies, right? They were born out of a necessity because of the way that the PAX8 module interacts with HaloPSA's billing is not super useful in some cases. It's if you're a small MSP and you just need to count licenses, it's great. But if you need to do more complicated invoice processing and things like that, it's not great. In fact, it could actually set you off the correct path. So BillingBot was one. That was a PowerShell desktop application I wrote a couple years ago to kind of change the way that we were processing the invoice and pushing it into our Halo invoices. And that's kind of where I got my start getting really deep into the Halo API. So that was my number one, and then my number two is OrderBot, which was my middleware that interacts between Datto Commerce and HaloPSA, and that one has always been a Blazor application. So it's all written in C#. That was where I started writing our C# SDK for HaloPSA, which is heavily inspired from the way Mikey's module is designed. And when I say heavily inspired, I mean straight up ripoff. My pre-flight function is even called initiate or like start Halo pre-flight check, the same thing that his is. So it's OrderBot being just being able to control the life cycle of hardware procurement and link that to HaloPSA in a way that we're getting our financial data out about those orders and also keeping the service delivery team up to date on how that's moving through the process. Those are my two favorite and probably the things I'm most proud of.
All right, cool. So, Mikey, are there any bounds to what HaloPSA can automate? And if so, how do we push those limits and make it do what we want it to do.
I think natively within Halo, yeah, there are definitely bounds to what Halo intend to be accessible automations. They're pretty broad, especially if you're looking like for, at other comparators, and they're about to get a whole lot broader with the automation runbook functionality, which is basically Halo building a kind of open-ended automation platform triggered by the PSA. But yeah, there are some bounds. But ultimately, really considering Halo lets you get a webhook notification for almost any activity that takes place in the system that you can use to kick off an Azure function or a Cloudflare worker or whatever kind of your flavor of little serverless automation runner is. Yeah, there's no practical limit to what you can automate. And with a bit of know-how and whatever programming language you really choose to code in, you can push the limits to as far as you want them. I can almost guarantee, if this weren't going out to however many thousand people, I'd bet actual cash on the fact that I don't think you'll find a platform as extensible as Halo. I think you're more likely to find limitations everywhere else in your stack than you will find one in Halo. Sky's the limit, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's been my experience too, right? As we have taken this crazy journey of implementing Halo so many times over the last 11 months, I feel like I kind of just everything in my life now is living in Halo PSA. And yeah, I definitely find way more limitations in external systems and third-party tooling than I do in Halo. It's usually not a problem of how do I get this data in and out of Halo in the way that I need to work with it. It's usually a problem of how do I get data out of this external system or back into this external system. That's usually where the hang-up is.
Yeah.
All right. So to make sure whoever's listening to the podcast doesn't think Chris is full of shit, or Mikey's full of shit, right? With it's endless possibilities, right? Or like it's made our MSP so much better. I figured I'd talk a little bit about kind of what for things like at TechPulse at our MSP. And our internal operations and processes and things like that. What were they like before, and how has Halo made them better? So I think this is going to be useful to a lot of business owners. I think
I'm
it's
making
important
notes to steal stuff. So
yeah.
carry on.
I think it's important to leverage, the full platform, right? Because like it's a waste of investment if you don't. But some things that stick out, right, are no specific metric reporting, right? I think what were we using, Chris, before? Zendesk, Fresh Service, a million other
Fresh
things.
Service. So
Yeah.
many different things. He wanted to buy breakage so many times.
Well, this is a real problem, right? Because even though I have a technical background, I'm not as, into the automations and APIs and scripting like Mikey and Chris are.
Nerdy. You can just say nerdy.
Okay. I'm not as nerdy. That's Chris and Mikey. They're the good kind of nerds though, right? These are the kind of nerds we want, right?
I have my days when I'm not the good kind of nerd. It just depends.
But yeah, I mean, like that's what MSP business owners do, right? They're like, oh, shiny new toy, right? Like I'm gonna go buy it. It's gonna be $600 a month, and then half-ass implement it, and then it's just a waste of money, waste of time. It didn't actually accomplish what you needed in the first place. And I've seen that. I've done it. I've lived that life, right? I've seen so many other MSP owners and friends do that. Mikey, everyone's done it. So you live and you learn, right? That's why we make mistakes. But
hopefully, we'll see if I can stick with the next platform for longer.
Next week we'll be talking about new PSA altogether.
That's the metric. As long as the PSA I choose lasts longer than the previous one, it was a solid decision. That's my metric.
There you go. There you go.
But no, you really will have to fight. The platform that takes me off Halo will have to offer everything Halo does with, completely sewn up documentation, a full API, and probably have to control my coffee machine on a schedule remotely. That's the benchmark.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. But yeah, I guess, right, like you need everything in one place. And when you're using Zendesk for this, another tool for that, and you have all your systems are separate, you don't have the data, or you got to work really hard and put everything into a SQL database or I don't know, something dumb, right? So I think having all the information in one place that really helps. You can report on data that we weren't able to do before at all. Um, and then obviously helps you with getting rid of the other tooling, right? Saves you cost and everything's in one place. So another significant quality of life improvement is billing, right? And even before, right, billing bot and these other things, right? Just by implementing Halo properly, I mean, we were saving so much time, right? Kylie, our VP of operations, kissed our feet after we implemented Halo, and we trained her properly and got everything on board, because I mean she was spending what, Chris, over a week on just monthly invoicing, and that's not including all the hardware and all the one-offs that we were doing. And now it's like, I don't know, less than a day, right? So and saved a lot of time for me too, right? Because I was having to do a lot of manual work with her to reconcile stuff and make sure things are correct, and that's time I did not have, right? My time could be better used elsewhere. So that was huge. And then wasted engineer time as well, because when you have your information in all these other different systems and none of them integrate together, well, then your engineers are just wasting time, and in turn you're losing money, right?
There's a question, like, business owner to business owner. I own an MSP. I'm technical director for a second one because apparently I don't get, easy life at all. But business owner to business owner, I find I sleep better with Halo because I've got the data I need to see business health at a glance. And no platform I used before Halo had enough of data in. I couldn't pull the integration and the data and the state of things into one platform quick enough to see at a glance, how am I actually performing now? And Halo gives me that. Have you found that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's game changing, right? There's two things that keep business owners awake at night, right? That, and am I going to lose money? What's going on if I'm not charging my clients enough? All that good stuff. And
Yeah.
then are my clients going to get attacked ransomware, right?
Yeah.
And so we solved both of those. That second one, I'll do a plug for Blackpoint. Shout out Blackpoint, but that's another episode altogether. But yeah, I mean, huge deal, right? I've lost so much sleep, over the years on those types of things. So
So, like, let me interject here. Pulling data out of HaloPSA reporting, I find it to be exceptionally powerful. But I would say probably 70% of the MSPs that go through implementation have some words about the reporting in HaloPSA. What is your opinion on that, Mikey? And what would you say to those folks? Because this is 7 out of 10 people come into the HaloPSA Discord and say this exact same thing.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of atypical here because most of the data we consume from Halo, we don't actually look at in Halo. Halo's native reporting, it's flexible. It's kind of powerful. You can it's a giant SQL engine, which means it's simultaneously the biggest pig in the world to use, because you've got to learn the SQL structure. And yeah, just look at the Swagger file and then imagine that scattered among tables that have names that don't make sense with fields that don't match what's in the API.
Oh yeah,
and you
personal favorite.
You start to get into the weeds of, do I really want to do this? But once you build the reports, one of the things it offers me that no platform before has offered is if I can stick with the SQL for longer than it takes me to pull out my last remaining hairs, and get a report built, those reports you can consume as JSON via the API. So the actual report you build in Halo that runs on their server side and does all its computation on their dollar, on your cloud subscription fee, you can just pull the results live out of the platform as JSON and do whatever you want with them. So we've got some cool dashboards built with Grafana that show us live stats from Halo that are being pulled on a cycle from a report that exists in Halo. So supercharging what they offer is cool, but they've also got reporting improvements coming. They need to just be a little quicker with them. I want to see them now.
Yeah, and what you mentioned there about consuming the report as a JSON from the API, you will sometimes come across fields that are not exposed evidently in the API, right? Or sometimes you can't get the data from the API without, 7,000 API calls to aggregate it and correlate it across different endpoints. But what you can do is just create a report that gives you that data exactly the way you want to consume it, and then hit the API to pull that report, and Halo will generate the report and feed you the entire JSON object with everything that you want exactly in the format you.
It's what we use for our license reconciliation with 365. Is
Why
we
should I
use a
write
Halo
this
report.
Yeah. Yep, because like, why bother, writing an algorithm to parse all this data, pull it out, and then display it the way I want when I set those columns up in that report in Halo and consume the JSON object, and that's done all the work for me. Yeah, that's a super powerful thing that a lot of people probably don't know you can do. And we actually do that in our SDK. A lot of the reports that we'll generate will actually programmatically create the report by pushing it into the instance, and then we'll pull the JSON objects out of the report because it's faster than actually setting up and configuring the way to pull that data holistically. So.
Yeah, that's the cool thing is, that whole everything uses the API thing goes back to you can consume reports via API and you can create them via API. So you can, that push-pull mechanism is really cool.
And yeah, and now with custom integration runbooks and integration methods, now it's like APIception, because now you can webhook out, webhook back in, and then the Halo API will Halo API itself and do anything you tell it to do. Which I still maintain whoever came up with that idea for that implementation inside of Halo PSA, whatever you're paying them, Tim, it is not enough, because they are brilliant. That is the single coolest
but also
thing I've
break
seen.
my brain. Fundamentally, they break my brain. I struggle. I'm like, what platform am I in again? And where are things? And
it reminds me of Jira script, and that actually I hate that. But yeah, I mean, trying to figure it out the first time was quite the challenge. But once I got it, the documentation ran through ChatGPT, and I was like, "Hey, ChatGPT, what the hell does this mean?" And then it explained it like I was 5, because you get like one little tooltip for each field, and it's like 20 fields, and like, none of this makes sense. This doesn't mean anything to anybody sane. And well, ChatGPT figured it out and taught me. But coming soon in a video near you. But yeah, absolutely. How much longer do we have you, Mikey? Like 8 more minutes? You got to go?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So one more thing I want to mention, I think is really important though on this subject, is client satisfaction, client experience, right? I tell my team all the time, hey, I don't sign your paychecks, the clients do. So make sure they're happy, right? So but before Halo, right, at times our client experience was poor, because we had long wait times to do something, right? The engineers had to jump through hoops to get something simple completed, like onboarding, offboarding, things like that. Human error, right? We're using automations now to decrease the probability of human error, and things like that. So I think it's been great. Mike, I may have to steal some of those Grafana reports from you. We're doing some really cool stuff, actually. Chris built some stuff in Power BI for like client reviews and stuff, to where we can display the data in those meetings. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do.
I'm moving more browse to Power BI as well recently. Yep. Yeah.
I have had a Grafana subscription. I have had a Grafana subscription for 3 years that Tyler has been paying for, and I want to use Grafana so bad. I love it. And then every time I get in there, and I'm like, oh, it's been 6 months. This looks completely different, and everything that I learned last time is now useless. And I feel like everyone else is porking my prom date, and I should be, working with Grafana much more than I am. It's on my agenda someday maybe when I'm retired, but.
Grafana is technologically cool, and I love it for that. And it's well put together. The reason we're moving Power BI is because that's what we're using with clients. And the more expertise we can build with it in-house, the more we can help clients build stuff with it. Client experience is massive though. Like the Halo portal and the service catalogs and the kind of automation potential we can do out of Halo is immense for client experience. So Halo has given us the ability to implement or to bring in LLM, large language model AI. Not that I'm a little skeptical of calling it actual AI, but that's a semantic point. It's allowed us to bring that in to how we operate and what we do in a measured and responsible way. We see the kind of what I call the bargain bucket platforms like Atera and Synchro bringing in ChatGPT to write scripts in really kind of dangerous and irresponsible ways, whereas Halo's API and flexibility have allowed us to bring it in a way where we're way more comfortable with what data it's consuming and what it's doing. And we were kind of pushing this early as an MSP. We were pushing kind of Azure machine learning from when we started with Halo. So we had, it doing kind of ticket triage checks and stuff in Halo pretty early on, and that's now moved over to a GPT model in Azure OpenAI. That's probably been the most impactful thing, because it means, rather than having a single kind of human dedicated to doing triage and slowly sucking their soul out through that soul destroying process, the initial triage step is handled by our OpenAI model, and then really a human just reviews that decision and kind of confirms it just to make sure it looks sane, because sometimes it does go a little off the rails and thinks this person's describing a PowerPoint issue, oh, that's a security threat, and it rapidly escalates it up to critical. It doesn't happen often anymore, but initially that was a fun challenge of working out why it was suddenly going off the rails.
How did you get yours to stop being surly? Because mine, when I tried to train, anytime I try to train an OpenAI model, or an Azure OpenAI model on our data, it becomes surly and mean. And I don't know if we're just mean to our customers or.
Yeah, we didn't. We do tend to be fairly slightly more direct and surly. So maybe OpenAI is just very British in its approach to things. Maybe when you train an AI, what it's secretly telling the world is that the British way is best, and you do just need to be direct and surly with folks.
Man, I feel like we fought a war about this, but yeah, you might be right.
Yeah, we've tuned some of the language just to make sure it kind of tries to go more down the constructive route, because it does have a tendency at times to be blunt to the point where it does sound like it's mocking their lack of knowledge. Yeah, we've done a fair bit of training on that as well. Dialing up how creative it is seemed to help, but obviously that does mean that sometimes it invents things. So it invented functions in PowerPoint, and was quite prepared to suggest that a function existed in PowerPoint that has never existed. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a fun journey, but it does save us time, and it means that really those human kind of triage checks, we spread them among the team, so everyone kind of mucks in and gets a bit of, keeps a finger on triage without us having to employ a dedicated person to handle that, which is nice. Yeah, that's probably our most impactful one for sure.
If you could go back to the day before, like the day you started Halo, implementing Halo, right, internally at your MSP, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
You're going to regret this for the next 6 to 8 months, and then you're going to love it. No.
Fair.
Okay. I probably would have gotten Tim's direct phone number straight off the bat rather than email or Discord handle. Our Halo implementation, we really started from not really using a proper PSA. So we didn't really have existing processes we tried to bring with us. So we kind of redesigned our processes at the same time as implementing. And what I probably would give my advice to myself is, like, make sure you've got your processes documented. Because even if you don't have them documented now, like, take the effort to document them before you make a major change to what tools you use to operate. Because really, that documentation will help you also review those processes before you start setting them into that technical model in Halo. And it's a really good thinking point. We did it after we implemented, and we had to go back and change a bunch of stuff because we sat down and we wrote out our processes and what they look like. And then we started making changes like, oh, that's a redundant step. But Halo was kind of forcing that step on us from how we built out. So yeah, start from like project plan it properly, basically. And I think that really, when we implemented into Halo, there wasn't really third-party implementers kicking around. There weren't the TechPulses or the Renadas or the other folks out there doing awesome implementation stuff, which I'm kind of jealous of, because our Halo stuff probably would have been awesome. But you probably wouldn't have HaloAPI Module if we had more of an implementation, because they wouldn't have been trying to fix stuff. So yeah, project plan. definitely. Write out the processes and document how you want things to look process-wise, and then fit Halo to how you want to operate rather than trying to fit how you operate to what Halo does. And work with an
Absolutely.
implementation partner. For crying out loud, work with an implementation partner. Whether it's Halo or one of the excellent like third-party guys that work with Halo, go with an implementation partner. You'll thank yourselves. This is not the whole ConnectWise or Kaseya style sting where they're like, this is what you pay for your PSA, and then there's this mandatory onboarding thing that you're not really going to get anything from. You will get something out of it. Everyone I've spoken to who's gone through an implementation with third-party implementers or Halo have had a really great experience as a result of that choice.
Yep, it's not something you can pick up and do yourself. It's really not. I tried.
I
And I ended up with Halo.
managed, but
Yeah.
I'm the one that breaks the mold because it was hard. It was really hard going.
Yeah, it's tough, and especially because it's not documented, right? And it's, what is documented is not maybe necessarily super helpful. And I try not to hold it against them because I try to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, this is such a complicated product that evolves so quickly. How do you document this in a way that would make sense to people who aren't us, who don't live in this system all day, every day for years, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and I think that's where they've hit the road. I don't think that they haven't tried. I think that it's just one of those things that's just really hard to do. How do you do it in a way that makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. You have time for one more, Mike, or you got to run?
No, I've got time. Yeah, one more question.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. So, Micah, can you speak on how far HaloPSA has come since you began working with it, and maybe kind of from your knowledge of what's upcoming, right, in the future with Halo? What are you most excited about, and what still excites you to this day from the beginning?
So how far Halo's come? We'll start there. It's come a really long way. And not just in terms of the big kind of big ticket features like the overhaul of the CSP stuff and that coming through, because that didn't exist when we first started. That was kind of in its infancy then. Right through to kind of the little tweaks that they've made as a result of feedback. They're just those very small quality of life tweaks to how it behaves in certain scenarios have been huge. And I'm a real fan of like quality of life tweaks in software. I think you can often achieve just as much with the small tweak that bugs everybody as you can with the big new feature that your biggest client is crying out for. And a mixture of the two is really what you need to be balancing. If it's all big ticket stuff, you're gonna pee people off. Really, you're gonna piss people off a lot because they're big new functionality comes with bugs. If you do your big new functionality with a bunch of small quality of life enhancements, which if you've ever looked at Halo's release notes, they do every release. You get one or two big things, and then you get like 400,000 quality of life enhancements.
The most I've ever seen is 803 bugs in QOL fixes in one patch note. 803.
803 is nuts, and especially as that release probably took place over the course of a month since the previous one. Yeah, it's nuts. It's a crazy cadence.
I think that's huge, right? Because like I'll pivot to like Ninja, right? Like we love Ninja, but like why not fix some of the core issues and bugs that people complain about in your RMM before trying to become a PSA, right? Like try to be really good at what you're, kind of set off to be versus try to add a bunch of new shiny features and still have problems all over the place. So
yeah, which to be is feedback Ninja have been given before, especially by me, but also that Ninja are they're starting to listen to. We've got like if you are a Ninja customer, you've got some cool stuff to look forward to in the next 6 to 8 months. Which is nice. Yeah. Same with Halo though. Like pivot back to your the other part of your question about like what am I excited about upcoming with Halo? Automation runbooks. Really excited for where that develops into. Yeah, really keen on kind of the power that offers, but also the ability to get rid of quite so much spend on Azure function compute. We can bring some of that back into Halo. Great. Yeah, great. Because we've got a ton of automation running around Halo, and it'd be nice to centralize and standardize where it's running.
Yep, I'm always going to wonder how they're going to rate limit the integration runbook, because you've already got the API rate limit. Are they going to rate limit runbooks using the API against itself? Because if so, then that might throw a monkey wrench into things. But right now, as far as I know, you can webhook back into Halo, and that's not affected by the rate limit, because I use that to cheat some mechanisms myself. But now that I've said that, Tim's furiously writing an email to Morgan and telling him to fix this. But
overall, like, I'm really happy with the choice of Halo. I don't think there's another platform that I would rank alongside Halo as a viable choice for how we operate now. And if automation is where you're going, if that's your goal, it's definitely the one to watch. It's definitely the platform to be really giving serious consideration to.
Well, deal. All right, I think we're good, Mikey.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been awesome. Loved it. Chance to nerd out on a Friday afternoon.
Thanks for coming on this ride with us.
No worries. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mikey. Really enjoyed having you. So
I appreciate the invite. It's been awesome. Look forward to seeing what the final product you come up with looks like after you've edited out, everything.
Julie's got a lot of work ahead of her.
Oh.
All right. Thanks,
Cool.
Mikey. Nice meeting you finally,
Thanks,
man.
guys.
All right, so that wraps up episode 1. Episode 1,
Nice.
we did it.
We did it, Reddit.
We want to thank Mikey for joining us as our guest today. It was great having you on, Mikey. And this is our first episode. We're hoping to do a bunch more, and maybe do several seasons of this. We're hoping to have other industry experts on here, some vendors in the MSP industry, whatever we can do to get the information out there to help MSPs like ourselves, operate and run better. So we're going to push our podcast out to all the typical podcast channels and YouTube as well. So subscribe and catch up with us there. And we'll also leave our links on how you can contact us, drop us some feedback as well on what you'd like to see in the upcoming episodes. But until then, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mikey.